You're not what I ordered." Caleb's voice cut through the Montana wind like a knife, his jaw tight as he stared at the woman stepping off the stagecoach. Eleanor Whitlock stood before him in a traveling dress that cost more than his entire herd, her posture straight as a fence post, her eyes meeting his without flinching. This wasn't the plain, practical woman the agency promised. This was a disaster wrapped in silk and lace. "I asked for simple," he said, his hands clenching into fists. "They sent me you." Eleanor's chin lifted. "And I asked for honest. Seems we're both disappointed." Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let's begin. 3 years of silence had taught Caleb Hart how to live with ghosts. The ranch stretched out before him like a promise he'd stopped believing in. 1,500 acres of Montana wilderness that demanded more than one man could give. Sarah had been gone long enough that her memory felt like something he'd read in a book once, distant and untouchable. But the loneliness that replaced her was as real as the calluses on his hands. "I need help," he'd finally admitted to the matrimonial agency in town, the words tasting like defeat. "Someone practical. Someone who won't expect things I can't give." The agent had nodded, understanding written across his weathered face. "We have just the woman, Mr. Hart. Eleanor Whitlock, 28, unmarried, from Ohio. She's listed herself as practical and strong-constituted. No romantic notions, just looking for security and a fresh start." That had been 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks of telling himself this was just another business arrangement, like hiring ranch hands or buying livestock. 6 weeks of convincing himself he could do this without opening wounds that had barely started to heal. Now she stood before him, and every assumption he'd made crumbled like dried clay. "The agency said you were practical," Caleb said, his voice harder than he intended. "That dress alone could feed a family for a month." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "The agency said you were a gentleman rancher. Yet here you stand, judging a woman you've known for 30 seconds, based on clothing she couldn't exactly change in a moving stagecoach." The driver cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Your trunk, ma'am." "Leave it," Caleb said flatly. "She won't be staying long enough to need it." "You don't get to make that decision alone," Eleanor shot back. "We have a contract." "A contract based on false pretenses." Caleb turned away, his boots kicking up dust. "You're not what I asked for." "And you," Eleanor said, her voice rising, "are exactly what I expected." A man so wrapped up in his own misery that he can't see past the end of his own nose. Caleb spun back around. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me." She stepped forward, closing the distance between them with a confidence that made his stomach tighten. "I traveled 1,500 miles to be here. I left everything I knew behind. And before I've even set foot in your house, you've already decided I'm not good enough. Well, Mr. Hart, maybe you're not good enough for me." The driver made another uncomfortable sound, but neither of them looked away from each other. "Fine," Caleb finally ground out. 2 weeks. You get 2 weeks to prove you can handle ranch life. When you fail, and you will fail, I'll pay for your passage back to Ohio, and we'll call this whole thing off." "When I succeed," Eleanor corrected, "you'll apologize for being a stubborn fool, and we'll proceed with our arrangement as planned." "You won't succeed." "Watch me." The ride to the ranch house took 40 minutes, and they spent it in tense silence. Caleb drove the wagon harder than necessary, taking corners sharp enough that Eleanor had to grip the seat to keep from sliding. She never complained, never asked him to slow down. Just sat there with her spine straight and her eyes fixed on the horizon, like she was daring the landscape itself to intimidate her. It was infuriating. When they finally reached the house, Caleb pulled the horses to a stop with more force than needed. "This is it," he said. "No servants, no fancy amenities. Just four walls, a roof, and work that never ends." Eleanor climbed down without waiting for his help, her movements graceful despite the rough terrain. "It's bigger than I expected," she said, surveying the ranch house with an appraising eye. "And the barn looks well maintained." "It should be. I built it with my own hands." "Then you're a better carpenter than you are a host." She walked past him toward the front door. "Are you going to show me inside, or should I explore on my own?" Caleb grabbed her trunk from the wagon, hefting it with a grunt. "You're going to explore plenty over the next 2 weeks. Might as well start now." Inside, the house revealed itself in pieces. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen that smelled of coffee and leather, 2 bedrooms separated by a thin wall, and everywhere the absence of a woman's touch. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, nothing soft or decorative to break up the harsh functionality of the space. "The bedroom on the left was Sarah's," Caleb said, his voice flat. "You can use it. I'll take the one on the right." Eleanor set her traveling bag down carefully. "Your wife?" "My late wife. She died 3 years ago. Fever took her in 2 days flat." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You never knew her." Caleb moved toward the kitchen, desperate for something to do with his hands. "There's beans and bacon in the larder. Coffee's already made. I've got work to do in the barn. It's almost sunset." "Ranch work doesn't stop for sunset." "Then I'll help you." Caleb turned slowly. "In that dress?" Eleanor looked down at her traveling clothes, then back up at him, with determination blazing in her eyes. "Do you have something more suitable I could borrow?" "Sarah's things are still in the bedroom, in the trunk by the window." He hated how his voice caught on his dead wife's name. "Take whatever fits." He left before she could respond, escaping into the cool evening air like a man fleeing a fire. In the barn, the familiar smells of hay and horse sweat grounded him. His hands found work automatically, checking the horses' hooves, distributing feed, mucking out stalls that didn't really need mucking. Anything to avoid going back inside and facing what he'd done. He'd brought a stranger into Sarah's house, given her permission to wear Sarah's clothes. 3 years of carefully maintained distance shattered in an afternoon. "Mr. Hart?" He spun around. Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, transformed. She'd changed into one of Sarah's old work dresses, a simple brown cotton that hung loose on her taller frame, but was infinitely more practical than the silk confection she'd arrived in. Her hair was pulled back in a sensible bun, and she'd rolled up her sleeves to reveal forearms that looked stronger than he'd expected. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Nothing. Go back inside." "That wasn't the arrangement. You said I have 2 weeks to prove myself." "Well, proving starts now." She walked toward him with purpose. "Show me what needs doing." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You ever worked with horses?" "No." "Chickens?" "No." "Cattle? Pigs? Anything?" "I can learn." "Learning takes time, and time is something we don't have much of before winter hits." He pointed to a bucket in the corner. "Fill that with water from the pump outside. The chickens need fresh water before they roost." Eleanor picked up the bucket without hesitation and headed for the pump. Caleb watched her go, then forced himself to return to his work. 10 minutes later, she was back with a full bucket, water sloshing over the sides with each step, but her grip never wavering. "Good," he said grudgingly. "Now take it to the hen house, that small building to the left of the barn." She did, and when she returned, he gave her another task, then another. Each time, she completed it without complaint, though he could see exhaustion beginning to line her face as the light faded from the sky. "That's enough," he finally said, when the moon had risen high enough to cast shadows. "Go inside. Get some rest." "What about you?" "I've got a few more things to check." Eleanor nodded, but she didn't move immediately. "Mr. Hart," she said quietly, "I know you don't want me here. I know I'm not what you expected, but I didn't come all this way to fail. Whatever you need from me, I'll give it. I just ask that you give me a fair chance to prove myself." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived. Her dress was stained with dirt and water. Her hands showed the beginning of blisters, and exhaustion pulled at her features. But her eyes remained clear and determined, refusing to yield. "We'll see," he said, finally. "Good night, Mrs. Hart." "Miss Whitlock," she corrected softly. "We're not married yet." "We might never be." "That remains to be seen." She left him standing in the barn, and he listened to her footsteps fade toward the house. When the door closed behind her, he sank onto a hay bale and dropped his head into his hands. What had he done? Inside the house, Eleanor moved through the unfamiliar space with careful attention, learning its rhythms and quirks. The kitchen needed cleaning. She could do that. The larder needed organizing. She could do that too. The bedroom she'd been given still smelled faintly of lavender, and when she opened the trunk by the window, she found it filled with a dead woman's life. Dresses and shawls carefully folded. A silver hairbrush with strands of dark hair still caught in its bristles. A leather-bound journal, its pages filled with neat handwriting that Eleanor didn't let herself read. These weren't just clothes she was borrowing. They were memories she was disturbing. A grief she was forcing Caleb to confront before he was ready. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry I'm not her." But sorry wouldn't keep her fed. Sorry wouldn't give her the security she'd traveled across the country to find. So she closed the trunk, changed into a nightdress that was too short for her long legs, and lay down on a bed that had once belonged to another woman who'd tried to make a life in this harsh place. Sleep came fitfully, broken by unfamiliar sounds and the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. When dawn broke, Eleanor woke to find Caleb already moving in the main room, building up the fire and setting coffee to boil. She dressed quickly in another of Sarah's work dresses, this one dark blue with patches on the elbows, and joined him in the kitchen. "Good morning," she said. Caleb grunted, not quite looking at her. "Coffee's almost ready. There's bread in the box and butter in the cold cellar out back." "What time do you normally start work?" "Before dawn." "Then I'll start before dawn tomorrow." She moved past him to fetch the bread, their shoulders nearly touching in the small space. "What's the plan for today?" "I need to ride out and check the north fence line. There's been coyote activity, and I can't afford to lose any calves this close to winter." "I'll go with you." "You can't ride." "I can learn." Caleb finally looked at her directly, frustration clear in the set of his jaw. "Why are you being so stubborn about this?" "Why are you so determined to make me fail?" Eleanor shot back. "You keep throwing obstacles in my way, like you're hoping I'll just give up and leave. But I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Hart. So you can either work with me or against me. But either way, I'm staying." The coffee pot began to boil over, steam hissing against the hot iron. Caleb grabbed a cloth and moved it off the heat with an angry jerk. "Fine. If you want to learn to ride, I'll teach you. But when you fall off and break your neck, don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't fall off." "Everyone falls off." "Then I'll get back on." They ate breakfast in tense silence, the air between them crackling with unspoken challenges. When they finished, Caleb led her to the barn and began saddling 2 horses with efficient, practiced movements. "This is Mercy," he said, indicating a gentle-looking mare with a patient eye. "She's old, but she's steady. If you're going to learn, she's your best option." Eleanor approached the horse slowly, letting Mercy sniff her hand before touching her neck.
"Hello, Mercy. I'm Eleanor. Please don't throw me."
Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Talking to her won't help.
"Can't hurt."
He showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to sit in the way that communicated with the horse without words. Eleanor listened intently, asking questions when she didn't understand, trying and failing, and trying again until she could climb into the saddle without his help. "Good," Caleb said grudgingly. "Now we ride." They started slow, just walking the horses around the immediate area, while Eleanor got used to the movement and the height. Caleb watched her carefully, looking for signs that she was overwhelmed or frightened, but Eleanor just set her jaw and concentrated, adjusting her position when he corrected her, refusing to show weakness, even when he could see the strain in her shoulders. "You're doing better than I expected," he admitted after an hour.
"High praise from you, Mr. Hart."
"Don't get cocky. We haven't left the yard yet." They rode out toward the north fence line as the sun climbed higher, painting the Montana landscape in shades of gold and amber. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Caleb had spent 3 years letting this view harden him, using its vastness to justify his isolation. Now, riding beside Eleanor, he found himself seeing it through her eyes. The way she looked at the mountains with wonder instead of resignation. The way she breathed in the clean air like it was medicine. The way she sat straighter in the saddle with each passing mile, determined not to prove him right.
"It's beautiful," she said softly.
"It's harsh."
"Things can be both."
She turned to look at him, and for a moment their eyes met with something approaching understanding.
"Beauty doesn't mean easy, Mr. Hart. Sometimes it means worth fighting for."
Caleb looked away first, uncomfortable with the honesty in her gaze. "The fence is just ahead. Stay close and watch for holes in the ground. Last thing I need is Mercy breaking a leg because you weren't paying attention." They found the break in the fence within 20 minutes. 3 sections of wire cut clean through, and tracks suggesting coyotes had been using the gap to access his property. Caleb dismounted and began inspecting the damage, his practiced eye calculating what he'd need to fix it.
"Can I help?"
Eleanor asked from atop Mercy. "You can hand me tools when I ask for them, that's all." She climbed down anyway, moving to stand beside him as he worked. When he needed wire cutters, she anticipated before he asked. When he needed fence staples, her hand was already holding them out. They worked in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Focused, cooperative, almost comfortable. "You're learning fast," Caleb said, as he hammered in the final staple.
"I have a good teacher."
Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt behind.
"Even if he's a reluctant one."
"I'm not trying to teach you anything."
"That's what makes you good at it. You're just showing me what needs doing. No judgment, no expectations. Just work."
Caleb stood, testing the repaired fence with his weight. It held firm. "We should head back. I need to check on the cattle before dark, and you need rest before tomorrow."
"What's tomorrow?"
"More of the same. This is ranch life, Miss Whitlock. Same work, different day, forever." Eleanor mounted Mercy with only minimal awkwardness, a vast improvement from this morning.
"Sounds perfect to me."
"You say that now. Wait until winter hits, and you're breaking ice on the water troughs at 4 in the morning, while your fingers are so cold you can't feel them anymore.
Then I'll buy warmer gloves."
She turned Mercy toward home, with a confidence that shouldn't have been possible after just a few hours in the saddle.
"You keep waiting for me to break, Mr. Hart. But I'm tougher than I look."
Caleb swung onto his own horse, watching her ride ahead with straight shoulders and quiet determination. Against every instinct, against every defense he'd built over 3 lonely years, he felt something crack open in his chest. Maybe she was. As they rode back toward the ranch house, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. Caleb realized with uncomfortable clarity that his 2-week challenge might have been a mistake. Not because Eleanor would fail, but because she might succeed. And if she succeeded, he'd have to confront the truth he'd been avoiding since the moment she stepped off that stagecoach. His carefully constructed isolation wasn't protection anymore. It was just loneliness, dressed up as strength. And Eleanor Whitlock, with her borrowed dresses and blistered hands and refusing the quit spirit, was about to tear down every wall he'd built. The week that followed proved Caleb wrong in ways that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Eleanor was up before dawn each morning, dressed in Sarah's work clothes, her hair pulled back tight enough to withstand the wind. She learned to gather eggs without breaking them, to milk the cow without getting kicked, to chop wood in a rhythm that didn't waste energy. Every task Caleb threw at her, she absorbed like dry ground soaking up rain. "You're doing it wrong," he said on the 4th morning, watching her struggle with the butter churn. "Then show me the right way." He did, his hands covering hers on the wooden handle, adjusting the angle and rhythm. The moment stretched too long, their proximity suddenly charged with something neither of them acknowledged. Caleb stepped back abruptly. "Like that," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Eleanor's cheeks had colored, but she kept churning. "Like this?" Better. By the 5th day, she'd stopped asking for help entirely. Caleb would come in from checking cattle to find dinner already cooking, the house swept clean, his shirts mended and hanging by the fire. It should have pleased him. Instead, it unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. "You don't have to do all this," he said that evening, gesturing to the pot of stew simmering over the fire. "What else would I do?" "Rest, read, something for yourself?" Eleanor looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This is for myself, Mr. Hart. Every skill I learn, every task I master, it's proof that I belong here." "You're trying too hard." "There's no such thing as trying too hard when your future depends on it." She ladled stew into 2 bowls with steady hands. "You keep waiting for me to collapse from exhaustion, or homesickness, or delicacy. But I'm not delicate. I never was. The agency got that part right, even if the dress fooled you." Caleb took the bowl she offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Why did you come here? Really?" Eleanor sat across from him at the rough wooden table. "Because staying in Ohio meant becoming someone's spinster sister, pitied and useful and slowly disappearing into the wallpaper. I wanted a life that mattered, even if it's hard." "It's more than hard. It's brutal." "So was watching my father drink himself to death while my mother pretended everything was fine. So was teaching other people's children while my own prospects withered. I'll take honest brutality over polite suffocation any day." The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. "I didn't know about your father." "Why would you? We barely know each other." She met his eyes across the table. "But we're supposed to be building a partnership, aren't we? That requires knowing more than just whether I can churn butter." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not good at talking about things." "I've noticed." Eleanor took a careful bite of stew, then continued. "But silence is also a choice, Mr. Hart. And it's one that's going to make this arrangement much harder than it needs to be." "What do you want me to say?" "Whatever's true." She set down her spoon. "Tell me about Sarah. Tell me why you're so angry that I'm not her." The words hit like a physical blow. "I'm not angry." "You are. Every time you look at me in her clothes, every time I cook in her kitchen or sleep in her bed, you're furious that I exist and she doesn't." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me I'm wrong." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her eyes held a challenge. "Tell me you don't resent every moment I'm here because it reminds you that she's gone." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. This conversation is over.
Running away won't change the truth.
Caleb grabbed his coat and headed for the door. I've got work to do in the barn.
It's dark out.
The door slammed behind him, cutting off her protest. Outside, the November air bit through his shirt, but he welcomed the cold. It was clearer than the suffocating confusion Eleanor stirred up every time she looked at him with those knowing eyes. In the barn, he found himself standing in front of Mercy's stall, his hands gripping the wooden rail hard enough to hurt. The mare looked at him with patient understanding, as if she could sense the storm brewing inside him. "She's right," he said to the horse. "I am angry. Angry at Sarah for dying. Angry at myself for living. Angry at Eleanor for making me feel anything at all." Mercy huffed softly, as close to agreement as a horse could give. He stayed in the barn until his hands were numb and his anger had burned down to ash. When he finally returned to the house, Eleanor had cleaned up from dinner and retreated to her room. The door was closed, no light showing beneath it, but he could hear her moving around inside. Caleb stood outside her door for a long moment, his hand raised to knock. Then he lowered it and went to his own room instead. "Coward," a voice in his head whispered. It sounded like Sarah. The next morning, Eleanor was already feeding the chickens when Caleb emerged from the house. She didn't acknowledge his approach, just kept scattering grain with methodical precision. "I'm sorry," he said. Her hand stilled. "For what, specifically?" "For running last night. For making this harder than it needs to be." He moved to stand beside her, taking a handful of grain from the bucket. "You were right. I have been angry, but not at you." Eleanor resumed scattering grain, their movements falling into unintentional synchronization. "Then who?" "Everyone. God. Fate. Myself most of all." The words came easier than he expected, like a dam finally breaking. "Sarah wanted children. I kept saying we had time. Then the fever came, and suddenly we had none. She died knowing I'd denied her the one thing she wanted most." "That's not your fault." "Isn't it?" Caleb threw the last of his grain harder than necessary, sending chickens scattering. "I chose the ranch over her dreams. I chose cattle and fence lines and hard work over giving her a family. And now she's gone, and I'm alone with land that doesn't care if I live or die." Eleanor set down the bucket and turned to face him fully. "Is that why you sent for a bride? Guilt?" The question was too honest, too sharp. "Partly." "What's the other part?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her in the morning light. Her face was still elegant, still refined, despite the work clothes and early hour. But there was steel underneath the beauty now, forged in less than a week of ranch life. She wasn't Sarah. She would never be Sarah. Maybe that was the point. "Loneliness," he admitted. "The kind that makes you stupid and desperate and willing to order a wife through an agency like you're buying livestock." Eleanor's expression softened. "I don't feel like livestock." "You should. I've treated you like livestock since you arrived." "Then we're even. I judged you just as harshly." She picked up the bucket again. "But we're both still here. That has to count for something." They walked back toward the house together, the morning sun breaking over the mountains and turning the frost to diamonds. Something had shifted between them, fragile as new ice, but present nonetheless. "Teach me to ride better," Eleanor said suddenly. "Not just well enough to get by. Really ride." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I want to be useful to you, not just in the house, but out there." She gestured toward the vast expanse of ranch land. "You can't run this place alone, Mr. Hart. You need a partner who can ride fence lines and drive cattle and help with all of it. So teach me." "That'll take time." "We have time. 2 weeks, remember?"
Her mouth curved in a small smile. Though I suspect we both know I'm not leaving after 2 weeks.
Don't be so sure.
I am sure. Because you need me, whether you want to admit it or not. And I need this place, this life, a future that's mine to build instead of one handed to me like charity.
Caleb found himself smiling back, just barely. You're stubborn as a mule.
Stubbornness is an asset in Montana.
So I'm learning. The riding lessons began that afternoon. Caleb saddled Mercy and his own horse, a big gelding named Duke, who had the temperament of a saint and the patience of Job. They rode out past the north fence line, past the repaired section they'd worked on together, into territory Eleanor hadn't seen yet. This is the hard part, Caleb said when they reached a steep incline scattered with loose rocks. City riding is flat and easy. Ranch riding means climbing hills, crossing rivers, navigating terrain that'll kill you if you're not careful. Eleanor studied the slope with serious eyes.
Show me.
He did, demonstrating how to lean forward in the saddle, how to trust the horse's instincts, how to read the ground ahead for danger. Then he made her do it, staying close enough to help if she got into trouble, but far enough away to let her learn. She fell twice. The first time, she rolled with the impact like he'd shown her, and was back on her feet before he could dismount. The second time, she hit harder. The breath knocked from her lungs, and Caleb was beside her in seconds.
Are you hurt?
Eleanor gasped for air, her face pale.
Just winded.
That's enough for today.
No.
She grabbed his outstretched hand and pulled herself up, wincing.
I need to do this. I need to know I can.
Eleanor,
please.
The word came out desperate, raw.
I can't fail at this, too.
The two hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Caleb wanted to ask what else she'd failed at, what had driven her to Montana beyond just escape. But her eyes were pleading, and he recognized the look. He'd worn it himself often enough. All right, he said quietly, but we go slower, and you listen to everything I say.
I will.
They spent another hour on that hillside, Eleanor mounting and dismounting and mounting again until she could navigate the slope without falling. Her determination was absolute, bordering on reckless, and Caleb found himself admiring it despite his better judgment. When they finally headed home, the sun was low, and Eleanor was listing in the saddle from exhaustion. But she'd mastered the hill, and the triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. You did good today, Caleb said as they approached the barn.
I did adequate,
Eleanor corrected. Good is still a ways off.
You're too hard on yourself.
That makes two of us. They unsaddled the horses together, working in companionable quiet. Caleb showed her how to brush down Mercy properly, how to check for injuries, how to distribute feed. Eleanor absorbed it all with the same intense focus she brought to everything.
Mr. Hart, she said as they finished, can I ask you something?
Depends on the question.
When does it stop hurting? The grief?
Caleb stilled, his hand frozen on Duke's flank. What makes you think it stops?
Hope, I suppose.
Eleanor moved to stand in front of him, forcing eye contact.
Because if it doesn't stop, if this weight just stays forever, then I don't know how people survive it.
You're grieving someone?
My mother.
She died 6 months before I contacted the agency. And some days, it feels like I'm drowning in the absence of her. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly.
So I need to know if it gets better. If coming here was the right choice, or just running away in a different direction.
Caleb understood then why she pushed so hard, why failure terrified her more than physical pain. She was trying to outrun grief the same way he had, through work and distance and relentless forward motion. It doesn't stop, he said honestly, but it changes, gets quieter. You learn to carry it instead of letting it carry you.
How long did that take you?
I'll let you know when it happens. Eleanor laughed,
a sound caught between humor and tears. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two broken people trying to build something whole. Maybe that's what makes it work. Caleb surprised himself by reaching out and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Two people who understand that life isn't perfect, that sometimes just surviving is enough. Eleanor's breath caught at the gesture. Is that what we're doing? Just surviving? Right now, yes. But maybe... He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Maybe what? Maybe someday it could be more than that. Caleb dropped his hand, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. But I can't promise anything, Eleanor. I don't know if I have anything left to give besides this ranch and hard work and honesty. That's more than most men offer. She stepped back, creating safe distance between them. I should start dinner. I'll finish up here. Eleanor left him in the barn, and Caleb listened to her footsteps fade for the second time since she'd arrived. But this time felt different. Less like retreat and more like the natural rhythm of two people learning to share space. That night over dinner, they talked about small things. The weather turning colder, supplies they'd need before winter, repairs the barn roof required. Surface conversation that felt like laying foundation stones, one careful word at a time. Your 2 weeks are almost up, Eleanor mentioned as they cleaned up together. Caleb dried a plate with more attention than necessary. I know. Are you going to send me home? No. The word came out certain, final. Eleanor turned to look at him, dishwater dripping from her hands. No? You've proven yourself 10 times over. You work harder than any ranch hand I've ever hired. You don't complain, and you're learning faster than I thought possible. Caleb set down the dried plate. But more than that, you're good to have around. The house feels less empty. The work feels less endless. And I find myself looking forward to conversations instead of dreading them. Eleanor's eyes shimmered with emotion she didn't try to hide. So what happens now? Now we move forward with the arrangement as planned. We get married by the circuit judge when he comes through next month. We build this partnership into something that works for both of us. He met her gaze steadily. And we see where it leads, without forcing it to be something it's not ready to be. That sounds reasonable. Reasonable is good. Reasonable we can do. But as Eleanor smiled at him across the kitchen, dishwater still dripping, and her borrowed dress showing new stains from the day's work, Caleb realized that reasonable was a lie. There was nothing reasonable about the way his chest tightened when she laughed, or how he found himself making excuses to work near her, or the fact that he'd started imagining a future that included more than just survival. He was in trouble. Deep, complicated, terrifying trouble. And from the way Eleanor was looking at him, he suspected she knew it, too. The trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of dark clouds building over the northern mountains. Caleb stood on the porch at dawn, watching the sky with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to read weather like scripture. Storm's coming. Big one. Eleanor joined him, wrapping Sarah's old shawl tighter against the biting wind. How big? Big enough to trap us inside for days, maybe a week. He turned to her, his expression grim. We need to prepare. Now. They worked with urgent efficiency, hauling firewood until the pile reached the rafters, filling every container with water, moving the horses and cattle to the reinforced shelter, stacking hay bales against the barn walls. Eleanor matched him stride for stride, her breath coming in white puffs, her hands raw from the cold. More wood, Caleb ordered, as the first flakes began to fall. We can never have too much. The pile's already more. She went without arguing, understanding the edge in his voice. This wasn't caution. This was fear. By noon, the snow was falling thick and fast, erasing the horizon. Caleb made one last check of the barn, securing every latch,
every door. When he returned to the house, Eleanor had soup heating and extra blankets laid out.
"How long?"
she asked. 3 days minimum. Could be longer. He stamped snow from his boots. We've got food and water for 2 weeks if we're careful. Heat for longer if the wood holds.
"Then we'll be fine."
Fine is relative when you're snowed in with someone you barely know. Eleanor ladled soup into bowls, her movements steady despite the anxiety creeping into her chest.
"We know each other better than we did 2 weeks ago."
Not well enough for this. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to examine. Outside, the wind began to howl, rattling the windows in their frames. That first night, they maintained careful distance. Caleb took his usual chair by the fire, working on harness that needed mending. Eleanor sat at the table with Sarah's journal, which she'd finally allowed herself to open, reading by lamplight about a woman who'd loved this ranch and the man who ran it.
"She wrote about you,"
Eleanor said quietly. Caleb's hands stilled. You shouldn't read that.
"Probably not, but I am anyway."
She turned a page carefully.
"She said you worked too hard, that you forgot to live while you were busy surviving."
She said a lot of things.
She was right about this one.
Eleanor looked up at him.
"You're still doing it. Working yourself to exhaustion because stopping means feeling things you'd rather avoid."
"And what are you avoiding?" Caleb shot back. "You work just as hard."
"The same things you are. Grief, fear, the terrifying possibility that we might actually build something real here."
The wind screamed louder, as if punctuating her words. Snow began to pile against the windows, blocking out what little light remained. "We should sleep," Caleb said abruptly. "Long days ahead." But sleep came hard with the storm raging outside and awareness crackling inside. Caleb lay in his room, listening to Eleanor move in hers, the thin wall between them feeling both too thick and not thick enough. He thought about her reading Sarah's journal, learning his history through his dead wife's eyes, and wondered what truths she was discovering that he'd never spoken aloud. The second day dawned gray and violent. The storm had intensified overnight, snow piling so high against the door that Caleb had to force it open with his shoulder. Wind-driven snow immediately blasted inside, making Eleanor gasp. "We need to check the animals," he shouted over the howl. "In this? They'll die if we don't." They bundled in every layer they could find, wrapping scarves around their faces until only their eyes showed. Caleb tied a rope around his waist, then Eleanor's, connecting them with 6 feet of line. "Don't let go," he ordered. "If you fall, I'll pull you up. If I fall, you get back to the house. Understand? I'm not leaving you out there." "Eleanor, I said I'm not leaving you. We do this together or not at all." There was no time to argue. They pushed out into the storm, immediately swallowed by whiteout conditions so complete that Caleb couldn't see his own hands. The rope between them became their only connection to each other and to survival. The trip to the barn normally took 2 minutes. Today it took 20, fighting for every step against wind that wanted to knock them flat. When they finally reached the door, Caleb's fingers were too numb to work the latch. Eleanor shouldered in front of him, her smaller hands somehow managing what his couldn't. Inside, the animals were restless but alive. The shelter had held, the water hadn't frozen yet, and the hay was still accessible. They worked fast, knowing every minute outside was borrowed time. Caleb distributed feed while Eleanor broke ice from the water troughs, both of them moving with practiced synchronization. "We need to go," Caleb finally said, "before we lose our way back." But when they opened the door, the storm had worsened impossibly. Visibility was 0. The world had become nothing but white noise and killing cold. "We can't stay here," Eleanor said, her voice muffled by the scarf. "No heat, no food. And we might not make it back to the house." They stood in the doorway, caught between two bad choices. Then Eleanor grabbed his hand through their gloves. "Together," she said. "We make it together." Caleb squeezed back. Together. They stepped into the maelstrom. The rope saved them twice. Once, when Eleanor stumbled into a snowdrift and would have disappeared if not for Caleb's immediate pull. Once, when Caleb veered left instead of right, and Eleanor yanked him back on course through pure instinct. When they finally crashed through the door of the house, they were ice-covered statues barely able to move. "Fire!" Caleb managed through chattering teeth. "Get to the fire!" They staggered to the hearth, so cold that the heat felt like knives. Eleanor's fingers were white, her lips blue. Caleb pulled off her gloves and wrapped her hands in his, rubbing circulation back with desperate intensity. "Stay with me," he commanded. "Don't you dare fade on me now." "I'm fine," she stuttered. "Just cold." "You're hypothermic. We both are." He pulled her closer, wrapping them both in the blankets she'd laid out yesterday. "We need to share heat. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "Pretend I am. Now get over here." She did, pressing against him under the layers of wool and quilt. Their bodies shook in tandem, teeth chattering, both of them wet and frozen and frighteningly vulnerable. Slowly, agonizingly, warmth began to seep back in. "That was stupid," Eleanor whispered. "Had to be done. We could have died, but we didn't." Caleb adjusted the blanket to cover them both better, because you were smart enough to grab that rope and brave enough to not let go. Eleanor turned her face into his shoulder. "I was terrified." "So was I." "You don't show it." "That doesn't mean it's not there." He felt her shivering begin to ease, her breathing start to even out. Fear is just part of living out here. You learn to work through it, or it paralyzes you. They stayed wrapped together until feeling returned to their extremities, and their clothes began to dry from body heat. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, something had fundamentally shifted. The barriers they'd carefully maintained had crumbled in the face of shared mortality. "Caleb," Eleanor said softly. It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Yeah?" "Thank you for pulling me out of that drift." "Thank you for getting the barn door open. We'd have frozen to death if you hadn't." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "We make a good team." "We do. Even when we're trying not to." "Especially then." Eleanor's eyes held questions she didn't ask, promises neither of them was ready to make. But the moment stretched between them, charged and fragile, until Caleb did what he'd been wanting to do since she'd stepped off that stagecoach 3 weeks ago. He kissed her. It was brief, tentative, more question than answer. Eleanor froze for a heartbeat, then melted into him with a soft sound that made his chest ache. When they broke apart, her eyes were wide. "We shouldn't," she whispered. "I know. It complicates everything." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because you almost died today. We both did. And I realized I'd regret never knowing what it felt like to kiss you, more than I'd regret the complication." Eleanor touched her lips, as if verifying the kiss had actually happened. "What do we do now?" "I don't know, but we've got 3 more days trapped in this house to figure it out." The storm raged for 5 days, not 3. 5 days of forced proximity that stripped away every pretense and defense. They played cards with a deck so old the faces had worn smooth. They told stories about their childhoods, their failures, their fears. Eleanor read aloud from Sarah's journal with Caleb's permission, and they mourned his dead wife together in a way that felt less like betrayal and more like benediction. On the 4th night, with the storm still howling and provisions running low, Eleanor found Caleb standing at the window, staring into the white void.
"Can't sleep?" she asked.
"Thinking.
About?
About how I brought you here, expecting you to fail. Hoping for it, maybe, because that would prove I was right to stay closed off and alone." He turned to face her. "And instead, you've proven that I was wrong about everything." Eleanor moved to stand beside him.
"Not everything."
"The important things. You're not weak or delicate or unsuited for this life. You're stronger than I am in ways I'm only beginning to understand." His voice dropped. "And I'm falling for you in ways that terrify me, because losing Sarah nearly killed me, and I don't know if I could survive losing you too." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Eleanor took his hand.
"Then don't lose me," she said simply. "Choose to keep me instead."
"It's not that easy."
"Nothing worth having is easy. You taught me that."
She stepped closer, bridging the last gap between them.
"I'm here, Caleb. I'm not a ghost or a memory or a replacement. I'm real, and I'm choosing this life with you. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose it back."
Caleb looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. In the lamplight, she looked both strong and vulnerable, certain and scared. Everything he felt reflected back at him.
"I'm afraid," he admitted.
"So am I. But we can be afraid together." Eleanor squeezed his fingers.
"That's what partnership means, facing the scary things as a team instead of alone."
Outside, the wind began to die down. After 5 days of relentless assault, the storm was finally losing strength. By morning, they'd be able to dig out, check the damage, return to the rhythm of ranch work. But something had changed during those trapped days. Something fundamental and irreversible. "When the circuit judge comes next month," Caleb said slowly, "I want the marriage to be real, not just a practical arrangement. Real." Eleanor's breath caught.
"You mean that?"
"I do, if you'll have me."
"With all your grief and guilt and terrible communication skills?"
She smiled through sudden tears.
"Yes, I'll have you."
He kissed her again, deeper this time, with 5 days of pent-up longing and 3 years of loneliness, finally breaking through. Eleanor kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his like she was trying to fuse them together through sheer will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Fair warning," he said. "I'm going to mess this up. Regularly."
"I'm counting on it. Gives me something to fix."
Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and real.
"We'll mess it up together, and then we'll figure it out together. That's how this works."
"Is it?"
"It is now."
The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. They dug themselves out through 3 feet of snow, working side by side with shovels and determination. The barn had held, the animals had survived, and the house still stood strong against the Montana wilderness. But more than that, they'd survived each other. The forced intimacy of the storm hadn't broken them. It had forged them into something stronger than either had been alone. "Spring is going to be hell," Caleb said, surveying the snow-buried ranch. "All this melt, mud everywhere, repairs to every structure. Then we better get started." Eleanor leaned on her shovel, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. "We've got a ranch to run and a wedding to plan." "In that order?" "Definitely in that order. I've seen your organizational skills. We're doing ranch first." Caleb laughed, the sound rusty from disuse, but genuine. "Yes, ma'am." As they worked to clear paths and restore order, the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered world in shades of gold and blue. The storm had passed, the worst was behind them, and ahead lay a future neither had expected but both were brave enough to reach for. Together, they'd face whatever came next, the spring mud and summer heat and next winter's cold, the hard days and the good ones, the fights and the forgiveness, the slow building of a life that was theirs alone. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing on the frontier ever was. But as Caleb watched Eleanor laugh while trying to free a shovel from a snowdrift, he realized that easy had never been the goal. Real was the goal. And this, messy, complicated, terrifying, and absolutely real, was exactly what he'd needed all along. The thaw came 2 weeks later with a vengeance, turning the ranch into a sea of mud that sucked at boots and made every task 3 times harder. Eleanor stood knee-deep in muck, trying to free a fence post that had shifted during the freeze, while Caleb worked 20 yards down doing the same. They'd been at it since dawn, and the sun was already past its zenith. "This is impossible," she called out, frustration bleeding through. "Nothing's impossible, just difficult." Caleb wrenched his post free with a grunt. 3 more in this line, then we move to the south pasture." "The south pasture can wait. I need to check on the chickens, and we're almost out of bread." "The fence can't wait. We've got 2 sections down, and cattle that'll wander if we don't secure them." Eleanor straightened, mud coating her from knee to hip. "I can't do everything at once, Caleb. I'm not asking you to do everything. I'm asking you to do this. And who's going to do everything else? The cooking and the cleaning and the 100 other things that keep this place running?" Her voice rose with each word. "I'm 1 person, not 3. Caleb threw down his tools with a clang that echoed across the pasture. "You think I don't know that? You think I'm not aware that I'm asking too much? Then stop asking." "I can't. The ranch doesn't stop needing things just because we're tired." They glared at each other across the muddy expanse, both breathing hard, both pushed to their limits by the relentless demands of spring work. This was their first real fight since the storm, and it had been building for days. "I'm going to check the chickens," Eleanor said flatly. "Fix your own dinner tonight." She stomped toward the house, mud flying with each angry step. Caleb watched her go, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He wanted to call her back, to apologize, to explain that his frustration wasn't with her, but with the impossibility of running a ranch this size with only 2 pairs of hands. But pride and exhaustion kept his mouth shut. He worked alone for another 2 hours, securing fence posts in ground that fought him with every strike. When he finally trudged back to the house, he expected cold silence and an empty kitchen. Instead, he found Eleanor at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven, her face carefully neutral. "Thought you weren't cooking," he said. "I changed my mind." She didn't look at him. "Starving you won't fix anything." Caleb washed his hands in the basin, buying time to find the right words. "I pushed too hard today." "Yes, you did. And I'm sorry for that. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. This ranch, it's not just land and animals. It's survival. If we don't keep up with the work, we lose everything. The herd, the house, the future we're trying to build." Eleanor finally turned to face him. "And I need you to understand that I can't be Sarah and myself at the same time. You keep expecting me to handle things the way she did, to know instinctively what needs doing when, to never complain about the workload. But I'm not her. I'm still learning, and pushing me until I break won't make me learn faster." The comparison to Sarah hit like a physical blow. "I don't expect you to be her." "Don't you?" Eleanor's eyes challenged him. "Every time I hesitate or ask for help or prioritize differently than you would, I see disappointment in your face. Like I'm failing some test I didn't know I was taking." "That's not fair." "Neither is working me until I can barely stand and then getting angry when I can't do more." Caleb sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how bone-tired they both were. "You're right. I've been pushing too hard, because I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of failing you the way I failed her." The words came out rough, scraped raw from somewhere deep inside. "Sarah asked for help hiring ranch hands. I said we couldn't afford it. She begged me to slow down, to not work every daylight hour. I told her the ranch came first. And then she died, and I realized I'd sacrificed our life together for land that doesn't care if I live or die." Eleanor moved to sit across from him, her anger softening into understanding. "And now you're doing the same thing to us." "I'm trying not to, but I don't know how else to be." "You learn. We both do." She reached across the table to take his hand. "But Caleb, if you work me into the ground trying to prove this ranch can succeed, we won't have anything left to build a marriage on. The land will still be here. The question is whether we will." The truth in her words settled over him like weight. "So what do we do?" "We hire help, even if it's just for spring work. Someone to handle the heavy labor so we can focus on running the place instead of killing ourselves trying to do everything." "That costs money we barely have." "And losing me because you've burned me out costs more." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "I'm not leaving. But I'm also not superhuman. Neither are you. We need help." Caleb wanted to argue, to insist they could manage alone. But the exhaustion in Eleanor's face mirrored his own, and he realized she was right. Pride wouldn't keep the ranch running. Practicality would. "There's a man in town," he said slowly. "Tom Fletcher. He's worked ranches his whole life. Lost his place to debt last year. He might be willing to hire on for room and board plus a small wage." "Then ask him." "It means another mouth to feed. Another person in our space." "It means we don't collapse before summer." Eleanor stood, moving back to the stove. "Go into town tomorrow. Talk to him. Offer whatever you think is fair. We'll make it work." The next morning, Caleb rode into town through mud that tried to suck Duke's hooves down with each step. The general store doubled as the unofficial hiring hall, with men gathering on its porch looking for work. Tom Fletcher was there, older than Caleb remembered, but still sturdy-looking, his hands showing the calluses of a lifetime's labor. "Hart," Tom greeted with a nod. "Heard you took a bride. Mail order from back east?" "From Ohio. Eleanor. She's—" Caleb struggled for words that wouldn't sound like betrayal to Sarah's memory. "She's strong, learning fast, but we need help with spring work." Tom's weathered face creased in thought. "You offering?" "Room in the barn, 3 meals a day, and whatever wage we can manage come fall when I sell the herd." "That's asking for a lot on faith." "I know, but I'm good for it. You know my reputation." Tom spat tobacco juice into the mud. "I do. Your daddy was good people, and you've never been known to cheat a man. But I gotta ask, why now? You've run that place alone for 3 years." "Because I'm not alone anymore, and I won't risk my wife's health trying to prove I don't need help." Something in Tom's expression shifted. "That's a better answer than most men would give. All right, Hart, I'll take your offer. When do you need me?" "Today, if you can manage it." Tom laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. "Desperate, are we?" "Practical. There's a difference." They shook on it, and Tom gathered his few possessions while Caleb bought supplies with money that made his purse feel dangerously light. On the ride back, Tom rode a borrowed horse, talking about ranching techniques and weather patterns, filling the silence with the easy conversation of 2 men who understood hard work. When they reached the ranch, Eleanor was hanging laundry despite the mud, her dress hiked up to keep the hem clean. She turned at the sound of hooves, and Caleb saw wariness flash across her face before she smoothed it away. "Eleanor, this is Tom Fletcher. He's hired on to help with spring work." "Tom, my wife Eleanor. "Pleasure, ma'am," Tom said, tipping his hat. "Your husband speaks highly of your grit." Eleanor's eyebrows rose, surprise evident. "Does he now? Said you're learning fast and working hard. That's high praise from Caleb Hart. He's not one for empty words." "No, he's certainly not." Eleanor's expression warmed slightly. "Welcome to the ranch, Mr. Fletcher. I hope you don't mind simple cooking and hard work." "Ma'am, simple cooking and hard work is all I've ever known. We'll get along fine." Tom settled into the barn loft with the efficiency of a man used to temporary quarters. That afternoon, the three of them tackled the fence line together, and the work that had taken Caleb and Eleanor days took only hours with an extra pair of experienced hands. By evening, the south pasture was secure, and they'd made progress on the irrigation ditches that needed clearing. Over dinner, Tom regaled them with stories from his 40 years of ranch work, making Eleanor laugh with tales of stubborn cattle and weather that seemed personally vindictive. Caleb found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't since Eleanor arrived, the pressure of constant work finally easing with shared labor. "You two are good together," Tom observed as they finished eating. "Seen plenty of arrangements that were just business. This ain't that." Eleanor glanced at Caleb, color rising in her cheeks. "We're learning." "Learning's good. Means you're paying attention to each other instead of just existing side by side." Tom pushed back from the table. "I'll leave you to your evening. Tomorrow we should tackle that barn roof before the next rain hits." After Tom retreated to the barn, Eleanor and Caleb cleaned up together in comfortable quiet. The tension from yesterday's fight had dissolved, replaced by the satisfaction of shared progress. "Thank you," Eleanor said as she dried the last plate. "For listening, for getting help. Thank you for being honest about what you needed. I would have driven us both into the ground before admitting we couldn't do it alone." "We're a stubborn pair." "That we are." Caleb hung up the dish towel, then pulled her close. "But we're learning, like Tom said." Eleanor leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. "The circuit judge comes next week." "I know." "Are you ready?" Caleb thought about the question seriously. A month ago, he would have said no, that he'd never be ready to risk his heart again. But Eleanor had changed everything, not by being perfect or easy or replacing what he'd lost, but by being stubbornly, honestly herself. "I'm ready," he said. "Are you?" "I've been ready since the storm." She pulled back to look up at him. "Maybe even before that. Somewhere between learning to milk the cow and falling off Mercy for the second time, I realized I wasn't just trying to prove I belonged here. I was trying to prove I belonged with you." "You don't have to prove anything anymore." "Neither do you." He kissed her then, long and deep, with all the promise of the future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor smiled against his lips. "The judge will want witnesses," she said. "Should we ask Tom?" "And maybe Mrs. Chen from town. She and Sarah were friends. I think she'd appreciate being there." The mention of Sarah's name no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like honoring the past while embracing the future, holding space for grief while making room for joy. Eleanor had taught him that without even trying, just by being present, by refusing to compete with a ghost, by loving him exactly as broken as he was. The week passed in a blur of work and preparation. Eleanor took one of Sarah's better dresses and altered it to fit her taller frame, her needle moving with the same determination she brought to every task. Tom helped Caleb repair the barn roof and shore up the chicken coop against predators. Mrs. Chen rode out from town with supplies and quiet approval in her eyes. "She's nothing like Sarah," Mrs. Chen told Caleb privately. "And that's exactly what you need." The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and warm, the first truly spring-like day. The circuit judge arrived at noon, a portly man named Morrison, who had been marrying and divorcing and adjudicating disputes on the Montana frontier for 20 years. "Caleb Hart," he said, pumping Caleb's hand. "Didn't think I'd see you taking vows again. Who's the brave woman?" Eleanor stepped forward, in her altered blue dress, her hair pinned up with Sarah's silver combs that Caleb had given her that morning. She looked elegant and capable and absolutely beautiful. "Eleanor Whitlock," she said firmly. "Soon to be Eleanor Hart." Judge Morrison smiled. "Well then, let's make it official." They gathered in the main room of the house, Tom and Mrs. Chen standing witness, while the judge opened his worn book of ceremonies. The words were simple, practical, exactly what one would expect on the frontier. But when Caleb spoke his vows, looking into Eleanor's eyes, they felt like the most important words he'd ever said. "I, Caleb Hart, take you, Eleanor Whitlock, to be my wife, to work beside you, to build with you, to face the hard days and celebrate the good ones, to choose you every morning and trust you every night. For as long as we both shall live." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly, but remained clear. "I, Eleanor Whitlock, take you, Caleb Hart, to be my husband, to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys, to challenge you when you need it and support you always, for as long as we both shall live." They had no rings, so they clasped hands instead, their calluses matching, their grips firm with shared understanding. Judge Morrison pronounced them married, and Tom whooped, while Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her weathered cheeks. "You'll do fine," Mrs. Chen told Eleanor afterward, pressing a jar of her famous preserves into her hands. "You've got the steel for this life, and more importantly, you've got the heart." After everyone left and the sun began its descent, Caleb and Eleanor stood on the porch looking out over their land. No longer his land, but theirs. "Mrs. Hart," Caleb said, testing the name. "Mr. Hart," Eleanor replied, her smile visible in her voice. "How does it feel?" "Right. Terrifying and complicated and absolutely right." She leaned against him. "What do we do now?" "Now we live. We work and we fight and we figure it out as we go, just like we've been doing." "Sounds perfect." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, they stood together in the doorway between past and future. Behind them lay grief and loneliness and hard lessons learned through loss. Ahead lay uncertainty and challenges and work that would never end. But they would face it together. Two stubborn people who'd found unexpected grace in each other's company. The ranch stretched out before them, no longer a prison of isolation, but a canvas for building something real. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Caleb felt something besides grief when he looked at his land. He felt hope. Hope lasted exactly 3 weeks before it was tested in ways Caleb hadn't anticipated. Eleanor woke him in the darkness before dawn, her hand shaking his shoulder with urgent pressure. "Caleb, something's wrong with Willow." He was on his feet instantly, pulling on pants and boots while his mind raced. Willow was their most valuable mare, pregnant with a foal sired by the finest stallion in 3 counties. Losing her would be a financial disaster they couldn't afford. They ran to the barn together, lamplight swinging wildly in Eleanor's hand. Inside, Willow lay on her side in the straw, her breathing labored, sweat darkening her coat. Tom was already there, his face grim. "She's been like this for an hour," Tom said. "Tried to get up twice and couldn't. The foal's coming wrong." Caleb knelt beside the mare, running experienced hands over her distended belly. What he felt made his stomach drop. "Breech. The foal's positioned backward." "Can you turn it?" Eleanor asked. "I can try, but if I can't—" He didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what happened when foals came breech. Usually, you lost both mare and foal. Sometimes the person trying to help too, if the mare panicked. "Tell me what to do," Eleanor said firmly. "Hold her head, keep her calm, talk to her, sing to her, whatever it takes." Caleb stripped off his shirt, scrubbing his arms with soap and water Tom brought. "Tom, I need you ready with towels, and that kit Sarah used to keep should still be in the tack room." "Sarah delivered foals?" Eleanor asked, surprise in her voice. "She was better at it than I am. Lost fewer that way." Caleb positioned himself at Willow's hindquarters, steeling himself for what came next. "Eleanor, no matter what happens, don't let go of her head. If she thrashes, she could kill us all." Eleanor moved to Willow's head, kneeling in the straw and placing gentle hands on the mare's neck. "Easy, girl. We're going to help you. Just stay calm for me." Caleb reached inside the mare, feeling for the foal's position. Willow tensed, a low groan escaping her. Eleanor immediately began talking, her voice steady and soothing, despite the tension crackling through the barn. "I had a horse once when I was a girl. Just a pony, really, but I thought she was the most beautiful creature in the world. Her name was Daisy, and she had a white star on her forehead, just like yours." As Eleanor talked, weaving stories about her childhood pony, Caleb worked with careful precision to turn the foal. It was slow, agonizing work. Every adjustment risked injury to both mother and foal. Sweat poured down his back, despite the cool morning air. "I've got one leg," he said through gritted teeth. "Need to find the other." "You can do this," Eleanor said, though whether she was talking to him or Willow wasn't clear. "Just a little more. Just hold on a little longer." Minutes stretched like hours. Caleb's arms burned from the awkward angle, his fingers searching blindly for the second leg. Then, finally, he felt it.
"Got it. Tom, be ready. When I tell you, pull on these towels exactly as I show you."
They worked in tense synchronization, Caleb guiding, Tom pulling, Eleanor keeping Willow calm through sheer force of will and continuous, gentle talking. The mare groaned again, her muscles contracting powerfully. "Now!" Caleb commanded. The foal came in a rush of fluid and membrane, sliding into the straw in a tangle of impossibly long legs. For one terrible moment, it lay completely still. Then Tom cleared its nostrils and it gasped, its sides heaving as it took its first breath. "It's breathing," Tom said, something like awe in his voice. "By God, you did it!" But Caleb wasn't celebrating yet. Willow still lay on her side, her breathing shallow, her eyes showing too much white. Eleanor stayed at her head, murmuring encouragement, but Caleb could see the mare was in trouble. "She's hemorrhaging," he said quietly. "Internal. I must have torn something when I turned the foal."
"What do we do?"
Eleanor's voice stayed steady, but her eyes met his with understanding. She knew what this meant. "We wait. See if she can clot on her own. If not..." Caleb swallowed hard. "If not, there's nothing more we can do." They waited as dawn broke over the mountains, the four of them, 3 humans and 1 fragile new life, keeping vigil over a mare fighting for survival. Tom cleaned and dried the foal, a filly with Willow's dark coat and her sire's elegant legs. Eleanor never left Willow's head, talking constantly, her voice growing hoarse but never wavering. Caleb monitored the mare's pulse, watching for signs of improvement or deterioration. His mind raced through calculations he didn't want to make. How much could they afford to lose? The mare alone represented 2 years' profit. The filly was supposed to be their stake in a better future. And beyond the money, Willow had been Sarah's favorite horse, one of the last living connections to his first wife. "She's stabilizing," Tom said an hour later, checking the mare's gums. "Color's coming back." Caleb verified the assessment with his own examination. Tom was right. Slowly, impossibly, Willow was pulling through. Her breathing deepened, her eyes cleared, and when Eleanor offered water, she drank.
You're going to be fine, Eleanor told the mare, tears streaming down her face. Both of you are going to be just fine. By noon, Willow was standing on shaky legs, nuzzling her filly with protective interest. The crisis had passed, leaving all three humans exhausted and emotionally wrung out. I need coffee, Tom announced, stumbling toward the barn door, and about 12 hours of sleep. After he left, Caleb and Eleanor stood watching mother and foal together, not quite touching, but sharing space with new intimacy. You saved them, Caleb said quietly. We saved them. You did the turning. Tom helped deliver. No. He turned to face her fully. You kept Willow calm when she should have been panicking. You talked her through the worst pain of her life with such steadiness that she trusted you completely. That mare would have died without you. Eleanor's chin wobbled. I was terrified the entire time. I know. So was I. But you didn't let it stop you. Caleb pulled her close, finally giving in to the need to hold her. That's who you are, Eleanor. Someone who faces the terrifying things and does what needs doing anyway. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with delayed reaction. When I saw her lying there, all I could think was that if we lost her, we'd lose everything. The ranch, our future, all of it. We wouldn't have lost everything. We'd still have each other. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. You really mean that? I do. This ranch, this land, it's important. But it's not more important than you. Not more important than us. The words came easier than he expected, like something that had been waiting to be said since the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach. I thought the ranch was all I had left after Sarah died. I was wrong. I had the capacity to start again, to build something new. I just needed someone brave enough to show me how. I'm not that brave. You're braver than you know. Braver than I am in a lot of ways. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. I love you, Eleanor, not as a replacement for what I lost, but as exactly who you are. Stubborn and strong and unwilling to give up even when giving up would be easier. I should have said it before now, but I'm saying it now. I love you. Eleanor's breath caught. You love me? With everything I have left to give. That's more than enough. She kissed him, tasting of salt and exhaustion and pure relief. I love you too. Have for weeks now. Maybe since that first terrible fight when you told me I wasn't what you ordered. I thought then that if we could survive each other's worst moments, we might actually build something real. We have. We are. Caleb rested his forehead against hers. This isn't going to be easy. There will be more bad days, more crises, more times when we're both too tired to be kind. I know. But we'll face them together. Equal partners in everything. No more me trying to protect you by pushing you away or working myself to death. No more you trying to prove you're strong enough by never asking for help. Deal. Eleanor smiled through fresh tears. Though I reserve the right to occasionally be stubborn about things. Wouldn't expect anything else. They returned to the house to find Tom already asleep in the barn loft, snoring loud enough to rattle the rafters. Inside, Eleanor collapsed at the kitchen table, while Caleb made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. We should name the filly, Eleanor said. What would you call her? Hope. Eleanor looked up at him with clear eyes. Because she's proof that even when things look impossible, sometimes you get the miracle you need. Caleb set down 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. Hope it is, then. They drank in companionable silence, letting exhaustion wash over them now that the crisis had passed. Through the window,
They could see the ranch stretching out under afternoon sun. The land they'd fought for and nearly lost. The future they were building, one stubborn day at a time. "My mother used to say that love isn't found, it's built," Eleanor said suddenly. "Like a house or a fence or anything else worth having. You choose the right foundation, put in the work, and refuse to give up when things get hard." "Your mother was wise." "She was, and she would have liked you, I think. Approved of you anyway, which isn't quite the same thing, but counts for something." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "She taught me that security isn't about money or status. It's about finding someone who shows up every day and chooses you again. Someone who fights for the life you're building together instead of just letting it happen. That's what I want to be for you. Someone who shows up. Someone who chooses you every single day, even when, especially when, it's hard." "You already are." Eleanor reached across the table to take his hand. "From the moment you agreed to hire Tom, instead of driving us both into the ground. From every time you've listened when I've pushed back, instead of just expecting obedience. From this morning, when you trusted me to help save Willow, instead of sending me away because it was too dangerous." Caleb squeezed her fingers. "This morning I realized something. When I was turning that foal and everything was going wrong, I wasn't thinking about the money or the ranch or what losing Willow would cost us. I was thinking that if something went wrong and the mare hurt me, you'd be alone here, and that scared me more than anything else. So you were being careful for my sake, for ours, because I finally understand what Sarah tried to tell me before she died, that a life built only on work and survival isn't a life at all. It's just existing, and I'm done just existing, Eleanor. I want to live, with you, building something that matters beyond just getting through each day." Eleanor stood, moving around the table to wrap her arms around him from behind. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll work hard and rest when we need to. We'll hire help when the load gets too heavy and celebrate small victories. We'll fight when we disagree and forgive when we hurt each other. And we'll build a life together that's worth more than just survival." Caleb turned in her embrace, pulling her down onto his lap. "Starting now?" "Starting now." They sat like that for a long while, holding each other in the quiet kitchen, letting the exhaustion and fear and triumph of the morning settle into their bones. Outside, Tom's snoring continued. In the barn, Willow and Hope rested together. And in the house that had once felt like a tomb for grief, two people who'd found each other through desperation and chance let themselves finally believe in the future they were creating. The weeks that followed proved easier than those that came before. Tom's presence took the edge off the relentless workload, allowing Caleb and Eleanor to find rhythm in their partnership. They worked hard, but not to the point of collapse. They laughed more, fought less, and slowly transformed the ranch from a place of isolation into a real home. Eleanor planted a garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables from the harsh soil with determination and Tom's patient advice. Caleb repaired the furniture in the spare room and began talking about, maybe, someday, filling it with more than just storage. They made plans for the fall, for the winter, for the years ahead. And through it all, hope grew strong in the barn, her long legs carrying her in circles around her mother, while Willow watched with patient eyes. Every time Eleanor went to check on them, she marveled that they'd both survived, that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible became possible through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. One evening in late summer, as the sun painted the mountains gold and the air carried the first hint of autumn's bite, Caleb and Eleanor sat on the porch, watching their land settle into twilight. Tom had ridden into town for supplies, and they had the ranch to themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Leaving Ohio? Coming here?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "I regret the dress I wore that first day. Completely impractical, and gave you entirely the wrong impression." Caleb laughed. That's not what I meant. I know. But no, I don't regret it. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because they taught me who I really am, underneath all the expectations and limitations I'd accepted as truth. She leaned against him. I'm stronger than I thought, braver than I believed, and capable of building a life I actually want, instead of just accepting whatever I'm offered. I'm grateful you came, even though I fought it at first. Especially because you fought it. If you'd accepted me immediately, I would have wondered if you were just desperate. Your resistance made me prove myself, and in proving myself to you, I proved it to myself first. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. The ranch stretched out before them, no longer a burden or an obligation, but a choice they made together every morning when they woke, and every night when they fell asleep side by side. We're going to make it, Eleanor said softly. This ranch, this marriage, this life we're building, it's going to work. It already is working. Caleb pulled her closer. Not perfectly, not easily, but really and truly. And that's all I ever wanted. Something real that I chose, and that chose me back. Then you have it. We have it. Eleanor turned to kiss him as the last light faded from the sky. And we're going to keep choosing it. Keep choosing each other, for as long as we both shall live. The ranch that had once been Caleb's prison became their shared kingdom, built not on romance or ease, but on partnership and honest work, and the stubborn refusal to quit when things got hard. They would face more storms, more crises, more moments when the weight of it all threatened to break them, but they would face those moments together. Two people who'd learned that love isn't about perfection or destiny or finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who shows up, who works beside you, who chooses you again every single day, even when, especially when, choosing you is difficult. Eleanor and Caleb had found that in each other, and they would spend the rest of their lives building on that foundation, one stubborn choice at a time, until the day they died, with calloused hands and full hearts, on the Montana land they'd claimed together as their own.